So the Washington Post has its panties in a wad because Trump is putting back up all these statues, especially Confederate statues. But they are just tying themselves in knots over at the Washington Post over this. So there's two articles I want to share with you about this. And there's an article at architect.com, because I've said many times on this channel before that dictators like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Castro, they took down statues, burned books, purged their society of all the unwanted. All in the name, by the way, of social justice. Social justice. I mean, isn't that what the left was preaching back in 2020 after the death of George Floyd? I'm still trying to figure out, what does the Confederacy have to do with the death of George Floyd? The George Floyd incident didn't happen in a southern state. It happened in Minneapolis, which is a city in the Midwest. But you got to give them room to loot and riot, right? So welcome back to the channel, Culture Confederacy. Here it's Monday. Happy Monday, everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you again for watching, subscribing, being a part of this thing called the Culture Confederacy. And if you're new, I don't use any fancy graphics here. Just me, my smartphone, a still shot, my voice, you, the audience. And we try to preserve great art, music, history, and culture. Talk about the issues of the day. You might get a tinge of politics, but that's what the channel's about. So let's get to this. Now, this has to deal with these, as I said, these Confederate monuments going back up. And there's one, or a few of these monuments in D.C., and then some of the other monuments that have been torn down, melted down, or what have you, are going to be repurposed and displayed, some of them displayed at this museum in Los Angeles. Now, these articles came out a few days ago, or within the past week. Confederate statues in D.C. area to be restored and replaced in line with Trump's executive order. This came out August 5th. Story by Ashraf Khalil. Two Washington, D.C. area statues commemorating the Confederacy will be restored and replaced in line with President Donald Trump's pushback on recent efforts to reframe America's historical narrative. Well, I don't think Trump is trying to reframe America's historical narrative. He's putting back up what you people on the left took down and destroyed. And let's be honest here. Republicans and Democrats will never get along. Never have. Never have, never will. Because it's all about power. It's all about power for these people. This is why we need to get rid of these political parties. They have done more damage to this thing called the United States than I don't know what. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced Tuesday that a statue commemorating the Confederacy will be returned to Arlington National Cemetery, talking about this Reconciliation Monument, which was removed in 2023. And the National Park Service announced Monday that the statue of Albert Pike, a Confederate brigadier general and a revered figure among Freemasons, would resume its previous position in Washington's Judiciary Square, a few blocks from the U.S. Capitol. But it's the only outdoor statue of a Confederate military leader in the nation's capital. But I didn't know that he was a revered figure amongst the Freemasons. And go back and check out the history of the Freemasons, or these fraternities. Because in the 1840s, 1850s, early 1860s, these men's clubs or fraternities were very common. And the fraternities, or these groups like the Freemasons, were an answer to the Holy Roman Empire, to the aristocracy. And you did have some people within the aristocracy that joined the Freemasons. But interestingly enough, they say here that Confederate statues around the country were toppled by similar protests, while several military bases named for Confederate leaders were renamed. And this one specifically, when it was put up, the Freemasons requested that Pike, the statue of Pike, that he be portrayed in not military clothing, but civilian clothing. The Pike statue restoration, which is targeted for October, aligns with federal responsibilities under historic preservation law, as well as recent executive orders to beautify the nation's capital and reinstate pre-existing statues, according to the Park Service. So the second article here, again, Washington Post. In this article, this came out August 11th. Richmond Confederate monuments returning to public view in Los Angeles. The memorials, removed amid the nation's racial reckoning, there's that word reckoning again, will be part of a museum exhibit on Old South imagery. There's a new one for you. Old South imagery. What the hell's that? Old South imagery. The language that these people come up with. And this is by Gregory S. Schneider. As the Trump administration seeks to restore public tributes to the Confederacy, some of the city's dismantled Confederate monuments are headed back to public display in a different way. I'm getting the sense here that the Washington Post believes that Trump is just in love with the Confederacy. He's just going to stick it to you by putting back up all these monuments. But they're going to be part of a Los Angeles museum exhibition highlighting the racism of lost cause symbols. The racism of lost cause symbols. Now, yes, they talked about slavery in the Confederacy. Yes, they allowed for it in the CSA Constitution, but they did not prevent any state in the CSA Constitution from passing a law to abolish slavery, because the states, according to the CSA Constitution, and it's in the preamble, were seen as sovereign and independent, acting in their own sovereign and independent character, which coincidentally coincides with the language you find in the Articles of Confederation. So where's the lost cause here? Richmond's Valentine Museum and the city's Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia said last week that they lent several parts of monuments to the Museum of Contemporary Art in L.A. for a show in October, including a statue of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. The protesters dragged off its pedestal in 2020. And again, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Castro, and all these dictators took down statues, burned books, and purged their societies of the unwanted in the name of social justice. The Richmond relics will join statues and images removed from several other places, including the Stonewall Jackson statue from Charlottesville and items from Baltimore, New Orleans, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And what they're going to do is they've melted down these statues or toppled these statues or whatever they've done to them, and they're going to reuse these materials to create something better. Something that isn't racist, isn't sexist, isn't homophobic or misogynist. Question here. If you believe, or you believe back in 2020, that all these statues were racist, that America is racist, whether it's Jefferson Davis or Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, you take your pick. Why the hell would you reuse that material from statues you originally thought were racist? You wouldn't want anything to do with that. You would find new materials to create a new statue that isn't racist, sexist, or homophobic. But we got a problem there because you look at the history of how some of these minerals were discovered, some of the wars that were fought over these minerals. Racism was a part of that. Unfortunately, it's a part of human history. But according to BHMVA Executive Director Shakia Gillette, Director Shakia Gillette Warren, The materials reflect our dedication to truth-telling and historical accountability, adding that the museum, quote, has a commitment to ensure that objects once intended to glorify those who led the fight to enslave African Americans are repurposed in ways that foster critical reflection, healing, and deeper public understanding of America's past, present, and future. Most Confederate memorials in the country were erected in the early part of the 20th century, around the 50th anniversary of the Civil War. By then, the Old South's defense of slavery had been supplanted in popular thought by the enduring creed of the lost cause. And of course, they talk about Jim Crow here. A lot of these statues went up during Jim Crow. But I'd like to remind people that in 1862, and I've talked about this before, Leland Stanford, governor of California, State of the State Address, called the Asians an inferior race. 1890, the city of San Francisco required all of its Chinese citizens to move to another part of the city, otherwise they would be jailed or imprisoned. 1931, California, they passed a law barring Asians and whites from marrying. So let's get into this article over at architect.com. This is from 2019. The Invasion of Memory, Hitler's Attempt to Rewrite the History of World War I. Architectural historian Despina Strategagos, or is it Strategagos? I believe it's Greek, discovers evidence of a political act by the Nazi regime to reposition Germans as victors of the Great War. So he was doing some research and he came across some documents showing their plans to take down these monuments and statues. And this especially was carried out in places like France and Belgium after World War I. It says here, Hitler's mania for wholesale destruction is well known. He had always planned to erect his greater Germanic empire on the pyre of old, and in particular non-Aryan Europe. He was obsessed with World War I and with avenging the Treaty of Versailles, the stab in the back as he called it, that led to the Imperial Germany's humiliation. And this marked the official end of the war between France and Germany. And this fostered resentment among right-wing Germans who accused the German signatories of betraying their own nation. But this is key here. This is key. In May 1940, when German forces invaded Belgium and France, they took their revenge, raising Führer, Tedesco, and other troublesome war monuments. Beyond historical revisionism, this willful destruction of war memorials constituted psychological warfare, in essence an act of killing the dead. It also deprived communities of the bereavement rituals that over the years have brought survivors together in shared grief and memories. The August 1940 directive by the Keitel, or from Keitel rather, had conveyed Hitler's order to Army High Command, also alluding to individual instructions communicating previously for the destruction of specific memorials, with Führer Tedesco being among them. Unlike these targeted acts, Keitel's directive laid out a path for a far more systematic and widespread alteration of memory. And so you have these army units that were in these occupied districts. They were instructed to survey the area of operations, including museums, document these World War I memorials and displays, as it says here, take them down and replace them, and display these German weapons as war trophies. And all this was going to be shipped to Zaghaus, this museum, military museum of Berlin, and they were supposed to accomplish this by November 1st of 1940. Social justice. Social justice. So you can wring your hands all you want, Washington Post. You start taking down statues and monuments. Start burning books. You're going down the path of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can follow me on Instagram, hashtag Jason Composes, because I write music in my spare time. Go to X, Culture Confederacy, at Culture Confed1 on X. Now you can find me at Substack. This is the culture. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out, stay safe, everybody, and keep up the culture. God bless. I'll catch you next time.